All right, so we're going to hop in. What's the goal of all Christian instruction? Worship. And so I want you guys to think about, we're going to talk about almsgiving, prayer, and fasting today. We're moving to the center of the Sermon on the Mount, which is the Lord's Prayer, which is a really interesting thing that Jesus does here, or Matthew does with Jesus' words that we're going to talk about. But because of that, then I want you to hop in your groups, make sure everybody knows everybody's name, and then can you think of a special moment you had in prayer with the Lord? What was that experience like? You don't need to share what happened, but maybe describe the emotion of it or the experience of it. What was that like when you had a special moment in prayer? All right, so hop into your groups. I'm going to give you all a couple of minutes, and then I'll pull you back. Stay in your groups because you guys are going to hop back in. Each time I'm kind of recapping. So what is the Sermon on the Mount? I'm going to keep... Moral portrait of Jesus on people. Yeah. Moral portrait. This is what it looks like to be my people, in other words. And so kind of give me, we started the first week by just introducing the Sermon on the Mount, who, what, when, where, and why. And then if you think about kind of the flow of the Sermon on the Mount, he goes right into that moral portrait. Blessed are. And the blessings were things that honestly, they don't feel like blessings if not God empowering them to be. So that starts almost, he's already flipping the world upside down. And then we moved into the extensions last week where it's like, hey, you've heard it said don't murder, but I'm after a little bit better. I want you to be reconcilers. I want you to be lovers. I want you to be humble. I want you to be peaceful, right? Well, today what we're going to be talking about are these hidden intentions. So here he's like, hey, it's not enough for you to not murder. I want you to reconcile. But then he's going to say, and by the way, for those of you who are doing good deeds, I want you to do them out of the right intentions. I don't want you to be show-offs. Okay, and so that's what we're going to be talking about today. It's sort of oh yeah, you guys were just not murdering. I was reconciling. He's like, really? And then he's going to go after those who do pious works. And then next week we're going to talk about stuff, fears, judgment, and asking. And then week 6 will be entering the kingdom. And then 7 we'll tie the whole thing up into a giant so what. And then you all have final projects. Do we? There we go. Do we need to talk about them now, or can we talk about them later? All right. But you do have final projects on week 8. Yeah, no, that's great. For anybody who has that anxiety, which is, next week it'll say don't be anxious for anything. So this week you're fine to be anxious. Yeah.
I actually think it would be helpful to give a tiny synopsis so people can start thinking.
Okay, well, Alex said no, you said yes, so go ahead and debate.
And I
say yes.
I do not like to debate the world champion debater. I will defer.
What's she drinking? I'll never forget one time Robin and I got in an argument, not a real one, but we were arguing about something in front of Alex, and then I went to go counter. I went, I think you're right. Yeah, you're right. Like that, and Alex is like, I have never seen this. And I was like, I got to quit debating someone who's trained in the art of debate. She doesn't win all the arguments, but she wins most of the arguments. So I will not bother to argue with you now. Synopsis of the final projects. The goal of all Christian instruction is worship. The goal of everything that we're doing here is that it would land in your life in a meaningful way. And so one of the ways that we have found that is cultivated in these TAP classes is by inviting you all to do something in response to what you're learning. To not just be hearers of the word, but do it. No, I'm just kidding. So the reason why there's not a ton of parameters around the final project is because it's meant to be unique to you, to how you worship best with the Lord, how you respond best to what God's teaching you. So what the final project is you do anything. Now I'll give you examples. People have written poetry. People have sang songs. People have done artwork. People have done recipes. People have cooked food. That's a very popular one. Those usually win the class favorite award. Anything. Somebody potted a plant. Somebody threw pottery. Mark Malone read an excerpt from a newspaper that he reads every year at Christmas really beautifully. And so the vastness of what you can do is whatever, however you respond. But the goal being, you're going to take something that God has taught you over the 7 weeks of instruction, and you produce something. Now, that produce something, it could be that you're just in your own prayer time, it's changing your prayer time, and you just come and tell us, hey, it's changing the way I pray. I'm no longer praying at the synagogue at 3 p.m. Well, you'll understand why I say that. You're right, in a little bit. But so it doesn't need to be like an artifact. But I will tell you, if you're thinking to yourself, oh man, I want to do this really cool thing, but is that going to make me the nerdy kid when I show up on week 8 and I like show up with like my book report? No. People take this seriously. You're not going to be that kid who shows up and is like, man, I worked really hard and everybody else had 2 cool virus and now I got my whole poster and everybody else. No, like I will tell you, people do really incredible things. And I think I have seen in you all the fruit of that it did something for you. So the goal is not to impress me. The goal is not to impress each other. After today, you will not be trying to impress anyone, hopefully, after we get through today's teaching. But the goal is, what did you and God do together in light of what you're learning? And so, and I will expand on this as we go. If you have questions, you're free to ask. So on week 8, that's what we do, is we come in here and we kind of celebrate and we wrap up, and then everybody, it's show and tell night on week 8. And so even if you don't do a final project, I cannot encourage you enough to come, because you will be blessed by what everybody else does. I've never left here not in awe of you all and in awe of what God does. To me, there is like this much that I teach, and the fruit in your life is what God does. And it is humbling and mind-blowing. And so, so that's final projects. Would you add anything to that? Those who have done them, anything you would add? Okay. Right back into your groups. Tonight is about hidden intentions. So the question that you're going to be asking is, what are sneaky ways that Christians feign humility or are showing their good works? And listen, I want you to think about even maybe how non-Christians see us and go, y'all silly for that. So you're going to hop back in your groups. What are sneaky ways Christians today feign humility, or they're doing good works, but you're like, they're getting a little kickback here, or they're making sure so-and-so saw that, or you got it. You guys understand. All right, hop back in your groups, discuss, and hold on to that idea, because later we're gonna respond to that idea later. Megan will. And that is what, so as we move into this, like a couple of quick reminders about this. Judaism, again, not bad or legalistic. Doing God's will is a good thing. Obeying Torah is a good thing. Jesus is Jewish. He is calling them to continue to do the good works that they have been doing as people who come out of the Old Testament. They are coming, he's not throwing the Old Testament away. And hyperbole is a very effective tool. If you've ever heard these taught, you've probably been told, oh, the Pharisees were so legalistic, they blew a horn and then gave their tithe. They did not do that. He is being hyperbolic. But he is saying they did do things to draw attention to their giving, not unlike we do today. And Jesus, again, is sketching a moral picture. And the weight of Jesus' words are meant to be felt. At the end of this, I'm not trying to get us to bag on someone. I actually want you to bag on yourself. And so we're going to eventually narrow in on that. And so, because we all know there are moments when we go, yeah, no, I actually liked the Atagro. That wasn't bad that people noticed that. Oh, you saw that? Oh, I was trying to on my right hand see what my left hand was doing, but you saw that? Well, go ahead and tell others about it if you don't mind. I mean, if you want, right? That's what I'm after. Alarm for me was I had the flu and we were with very talented leaders, and I did not feel like I needed to be there. The women who went with me, the leaders out of Watermark, I think it was a very good trip for them. But I have a context in which I teach the Bible. I'm much better in this context. There were better, more qualified people that could have been there. So I didn't post a bunch of pictures saying like I went to Africa. And then like literally this is why I shouldn't have gone to Africa. Because I got home and 4 days later I went to Greece to photograph ancient manuscripts. That's where I belong, in a dark closet, holding old Bibles. And I mean that. Like there was I get to go to Africa, that's really exciting, I want to do that. Not, hey, would this be in keeping with my gifts? Is this a good thing that God's calling me into? Also, it was like a reward for Watermark staffers, and I was not the first choice or the second. I was the third choice after 5 years of being on staff, and so I thought, this is my only chance to go to Africa, which is so dumb. But anyways, I'm just telling you, I did not handle that well. Okay. Coming on the heels of being called to do more than the letter of the law, to actually do the spirit of the law, now Jesus is going after their behavior when they are doing the law. So the three big things that he's going to address are almsgiving, which is almsgiving, prayer, and fasting, okay? And these are really important parts of the Jewish tradition. Now, what's interesting is fasting's not actually prescribed in the Old Testament. Like, there's no text that says you must fast, But by the time of Jesus, it is happening so regularly, it's considered piety, okay? And the early church picks it up and runs with it too. And so we'll see that as we jump into it. But almsgiving, obviously a big part of the Old Testament, and prayer is a big part of the Old Testament. So I want you to think about, like, what is reality? And reality is that God is the center of the universe. Like, God creates the world. He creates humanity. He rescues humanity. He sustains humanity. He protects humanity, restores humanity. And one day he will bring us, humanity, to the fullness of time. This whole thing is about God. The whole enterprise that we're a part of is about God. It starts with him, and he's the Alpha, he's the Omega, and he's everything in between. And what do we want in life? Hey, everybody else, if I could get your approval, that would be huge for me. Now, I know it's God's approval that I should probably be after, but everybody else, I would so love your atta girl right now. I'm not constantly seeking the pleasure of God. And we seek the approval of others instead of the pleasures of God. This is why movies like Mean Girls still work. Because we know that experience of walking into the crowded cafeteria in high school on the first day, and you're trying to figure out, where do I belong? And if you walked in there and you truly believed in your bones as a 16-year-old pubescent teenager, I have the pleasure of God. I am made in his image. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. My Creator delights in me. I have been given gifts that God uses. You would walk in that room and be like, who can I bless? But how do we walk into that room? Who can bless me? Where do I fit on the pecking order? Who can I stomp on my way to the better table? Oh, did y'all see my new shoes that I got before school began? Did y'all see yeah. Do y'all remember picking your first outfit before the first day of high school? No? Good for y'all. My first day of my senior year, I showed up with like basketball shorts and a t-shirt that said 180 days. And that was how many days until I got to leave that high school. And my teacher's like, is that really the attitude you want to start your senior year? And I was like, yes, it is. I cannot believe I have to do this one more time. So that's how I started my senior year. This is what this is getting after. We want the approval of each other. We're wired for that. And Jesus is trying to reorient. If he's painting a moral picture, then the people of God should be more concerned. And it's not to say we are unaware, right? I mean, you're human. If you were to walk into a room, probably best case scenario is maybe mixed motives. To really seek out the pleasure of God, and maybe there's a part of you that's like, man, I like that, I'm accepted. I'm not pretending like we don't live in a world where this is very hard. Especially younger people in this social media crazed world that they live in. I don't understand how they're not doing it well. But 6:1 is this thesis statement, and then he's going to talk about almsgiving, prayer, and fasting. So 6:1 sets up the whole thing, and then it goes, it's interesting, it goes almsgiving, prayer, and then we break for a weird moment where he talks about Gentile prayer. Don't babble like the Gentiles, and then he gives us the Lord prayer, and then we pick up again in fasting. And those three sections are actually very parallel sections with that break, but it's smack dab in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, and I think that's important. And so we're going to actually do those three sections and then come back to the Sermon on the Mount. But 6:1 says this: be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen. This is the important part. Jesus did public ministry. People are going to do public ministry. The goal here is not to say, oh, you're going to do everything hidden, which sometimes it would be appropriate to do things hidden. But there are going to be things that you're going to do in front of other people. The point is, don't do them so that you're being seen. Instead, do them because it's what is good and right. And he says, otherwise, you will have no reward with your Father in heaven. Okay, Jesus talks about merit through this whole thing. And so it follows this pattern. There's an observance, a prohibition, the intent. This is what you're wanting, and Jesus can discern that. And then he says, hey, you've already been given your reward then. You want the applause of others? There you go. That's your reward. And he's like, but maybe there's an alternative way, and then there's your Father's reward if you do it. It follows this exact, you can go look at it. It follows this exact pattern here. And so we're going to jump into these as we go, and we're going to talk about what is that observance, what was happening during Jesus' time, and then we'll come back to the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, so the observance, almsgiving. This is huge in Jesus' day as an expression of Torah faithfulness. So rabbis, right after the time of Jesus, said piety has three pillars: the study of Torah, prayer and almsgiving. That's how important this is. And when the temple is destroyed by Titus in 70 AD, almsgiving replaces sacrifice. So when they're coming up to Jerusalem for their festivals and their feasts, they cannot give a sacrifice because the temple's not there. They gave almsgiving. Almsgiving were designed to be used to care for the poor. This is what it's about, which is a very interesting, very Jewish thing, because they're living in a time of the patronage system. So you wouldn't normally give money to the poor because they can do nothing back for you. Now, you might give to one poor on the street, and then he kind of looks out for your family. Like, there's always a kickback. And so what's interesting about the Old Testament is God says, I will reward you. So you need to give to the poor, and they can't do anything back for you, but don't worry, I will pay you back for the good that you did. It's like God becomes the ultimate patron in this system. But he's using their language to say, hey, you don't need to worry about a kickback. I got you. And so it was very normal for Jewish people to practice almsgiving. Not normal for Greco-Romans. Not normal at all. And so this was a piety that was unique to the Jewish people that Jesus is anticipating his Christian people are going to pull forward. And it's something that continues today. This is a very important part of Jewish culture today, is to give to the poor. So he says, hey, when you give, do not draw attention to yourself when you give. Now he uses exaggerations. Don't sound the trumpet. You might have heard somebody say, don't blow the shofar at the synagogue, right? You've heard people say that. And like, I honestly think Jesus is hysterical because nobody's actually doing this, but he's like calling them. I think Jesus is so funny, y'all. I think we would have been like, haha, wait, all the time. I really believe this. We'd be like, oh, that's hilarious. Are you talking about me? When I kind of am loud and I chunk my money really loudly into the coffer, are you talking about me right now? Yes, that is what he's talking about. And so be careful not to practice your righteousness, yada, yada, yada. So whenever you get to the poor, don't sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be applauded by people. This is what he's saying. They're doing this because they want the applause. The reward? Good job, Mart. We're so proud of you. That's your reward. Tell me, how good of a reward is that compared to the God of the universe seeing you and rewarding your faithfulness? Which one do you actually esteem to be better? I'm going to be honest with you, in probably my 20s, I'm not sure that it was a closer race than it probably should have been. But this is what he's saying. And so, hey, don't do that. Instead, give discreetly. He talks about don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. And this is like about power. Basically, essentially, be discreet. It's a turn of phrase that means like, hey, you do not need to be loud in your giving here. And if you do that, your Father sees you. He knows. He will reward you. God loves a cheerful giver. God will see you. You do not have to go into the streets and get the attaboy and the applause from others, is what he's saying. But he says it, I just think like it's hilarious because they weren't actually blowing trumpets, just so y'all know. But they were being loud. If you got to think of the ancient world, public space was so public. We don't have I'm trying to think like public space, the equivalent, where do people go in Oak Cliff that we all see each other? Coffee shop. You go in a house, dude. Yeah, okay, so we're outside a Taco Deli, and there's one homeless guy always hanging out there. And every time I'm like, oh, hey, I'm going to go give him some tacos. Did y'all hear? Sorry, hold on. Hey, I'm going to give him some tacos. Robin, you want to get us a table? Because I'm going to get him some tacos. Everything's public in the ancient world. And Jesus is saying, well, we're not going to do that. We're just going to give to the poor. We're going to be discreet about it. Because you have a reward with your Father, which is so beautiful that God sees those things. Merit language in the Bible. So this reward language is often used to accuse Jewish faith of being works-based. But you can find statements like this on the lips of Jesus, like right here, that seems to suggest a works-based religion. This is language that the people of the Bible would understand. Again, they live in a patronage, reciprocity world. It's what they knew. They understand that there's a reward for generosity. So instead of saying, well, the reward should be you feel good about yourself and you're being just, he says your Father rewards you. Okay? And we go, ooh, we don't like that because we don't live in a patronage society. But what it's saying is God is your patron. God's going to take care of you. That's what this is ultimately saying. And so it is incredibly unfair for us to constantly accuse Jewish people of a works-based faith, which they would not agree with. They believed it was by faith they were brought, by grace they were brought into the covenant. And because grace is effective, then they live out covenant faithfulness, which sounds a lot like us. It's by grace we are saved, and if you love me, you will obey me. And so in Jesus' world, you just don't give to the poor without expecting a kickback. Period. You just don't. There's no concept of it. There's no inherent good there. There's something morally wrong with that person for being poor. That's not changed, right? Never mind, there's systems in place. But, so God promises to pay you back. And then the question becomes for us, is that enough? Is God's reward enough? So a litmus test, how do you know if you're doing this? This is Scott McKnight's litmus test. Do you grumble when you're not acknowledged for your giving? I thought that was a pretty cool question. Do you have envy when someone else gets credit and you don't? When you both did the same thing? Or what about we don't get what we want when we've been a big giver. The example he gives is like, you don't get to pick the next pastor at your church, even though you're the biggest giver. I thought, well, who would do that? But there are people, I think, that would do that. Or you count heads or numbers when you're asked to teach a Sunday school and people say, how did it go? And you go, oh, there's 20 people there. And you go, that's a weird way to answer that question. So I think here's what I say. How do you keep score, right? Like, is how you keep score based on the attention you receive or the good you get back? Or do you just say, hey, God abundantly supplies all of our needs, so we should be generous like God's generous? He goes on. Okay, now we're going to talk about prayer. He says, okay, the observance is prayer. Prayer in all the Bible was spontaneous as well as recitative, always. If you look in the Bible, there's spontaneous prayer and recitative prayer, which I'm going to get to this in a second. I think it's bizarre that there was and maybe it still exists, that there's a season in evangelical spaces where they really like poo-poo on recitative prayers. And they're like, oh, that's not true faith. Have y'all been in these spaces where they're like, that is stale?
That wasn't a season.
Okay, that's still happening?
Yeah, all the Baptists, yeah.
I think it's because it's associated with Catholics,
Yeah.
Yes. We are not the Catholics, so we don't do that.
Yeah. It's so weird. Because Jesus, anyways, okay, so whatever. That's bizarre. There it is, Larry. Like, and not only is it, and we'll talk about later, people actually prayed that. Like, they took him literally. I think we should take him. Anyways, so Jews had the Psalms and the Amida, which was 18 benedictions. And so this was their Psalter. The Amida is 18 benedictions. They would pray this. They prayed 3 times a day. The Jewish day starts at night. Do y'all understand that? So have you ever read Genesis 1? There was evening, there was morning the first day. Sabbath starts when? Sundown. Okay, so this is always like when you read Jewish stuff, it's always interesting. So there are 3 times a day. If I were to say you eat 3 meals a day, you would say Jews would say dinner, breakfast, lunch. Okay, so their 3 prayers a day are before bed. That's their first prayer of the day. Isn't that interesting? And then when they awoke, and at the time of the afternoon sacrifice, which is about 3 p.m., and they would face the temple, wherever they were at. Okay, so some hypocrites, so at night, you might be out before, why would you be praying? This is really concerning the 3 o'clock prayer. Maybe you walk out onto your roof and you're like, oh, good morning, sun, here are my benedictions. Maybe somebody's doing that. But mostly this is attacking that 3 p.m. prayer slot, okay? And hypocrites knew that they could be somewhere at 3 p.m. And then they could look pious. This is the prayer. It's sundown. This is our first day together, everybody. Here we go. So this is the prayer that he's attacking. Because you always say, like, well, why are they out praying? Like this, because everybody's going to. But imagine you're in a really important space. You stand at the top of the synagogue steps. And you're very loud. You have a voice like mine. And you enter in your 18 benedictions. And then you pray all these really beautiful, sweet things for your community because you know everybody's going to see and hear you. And this is what Jesus is after. He's like, don't do that, right? So, again, Jesus being a hilarious guy, he's like, don't do that like the hypocrites. And he says, instead, go into your inner closets. How many of y'all have heard this and you were told you had to have a prayer closet? Okay, it's because they don't understand Jesus got jokes, okay? Like, he is being funny here again. So, they love to be seen by others, and that's their reward. Good job, prayer. That's their reward. It's a very cheap reward. He says, instead, go to a privacy. A room could be translated as closet, inner room, pantry. Like he's saying, like, just go inside to the innermost part of your house if you're going to pray at 3 o'clock. He's not actually calling for that. That's not what he's calling for. But what he's saying is why are you trying to be seen? If the hypocrites want to be front and center, we're going to be hidden away. But he's not actually calling you to be hidden away. Now, if you have a prayer closet, that's awesome. That's please have a prayer closet. That's fantastic. But this isn't prescribing a prayer closet. This is not telling you to have a quiet time in your storm shelter. This is saying, why do you have to be obnoxious in front of everybody when you pray? Scott McKnight in his book, he talks about when he got invited to go to the White House. He's like, it's so random. But he said like it was interesting because when he got there, he remembers his mind wasn't really racing. He was so focused on everything because the moment felt so important to him. And he and his wife talked about later, like, it wasn't like we were just like, oh, this is just another day. And you might, like, they were like so focused on everything that was happening. And he was like, because the magnitude of who we were meeting and what we were doing. He's like, isn't that how prayer should be? That like the magnitude of who you're speaking to is such that you shouldn't be concerned about who's around you. Like you're having a communion with God.
Or where you're at.
What's that?
Or where you're at.
Yeah, or where you're at. So you might be on the steps because you just happen to be having a meeting with your rabbi at 3, I don't know. And that's fine. That's fine. I pray in public all the time. I get paid to pray in public. Like this is not saying don't be public. But it is saying, hey, the alternative to the hypocrisy is you're spending time with God. And if you do that, then your Father's reward is God sees you, even in your prayer closet, where no one else can see you. Guess who sees you? You can go to the innermost pantry. You can be like Jonah, and you can get swallowed by a sea and go down to the depths, and guess who's still there?
God.
Yeah, he is still there. That's the right answer always, Megan. That's good. Or Jesus, yeah. Yeah, if you're praying to be seen, that's a weird way of phrasing that. If you're hoping to be seen while praying, how sincere of a prayer are you having? And if prayer is about communion with God and beseeching God on behalf of others, what a weird paradigm that you're creating. Like prayer is about like, I want good for Jim, but I'm beseeching a God whose opinion I care less about than Jim's opinion. What a weird paradigm you've now created in your prayer life. God, you are infinitely powerful and good and wonderful. If you could help Jim, that would be great, but I'm going to tell Jim I'm praying for him because I know you love me, so hopefully Jim will think this is pretty great. That's a very weird place to pray from. And then the other thing of this is we should pray. We should pray probably more than we do. Like if you've ever been to a Muslim country, what happens when you're there? It's unnerving the first time it happens, isn't it? Call to prayer. No matter where you're at, what happens? 5 in the morning. If you're in a Muslim country, you will hear that call to prayer. It is loud. And if you are not expecting it, 5 in the morning, and you will fall out of your bed onto the ground and be very confused. But you know what everybody in that country does? They pray. And so I just, we might want to pray more. Just something to think about. Again, this has been a weird war on reciting prayer. So that's still alive. That's still a thing. Okay. That's really foolish, right? Like, we have a heritage of prayers, and we should enjoy that heritage. That's a really bizarre posture to take. Now, if you in your own life are stagnant, and maybe the prayers that you keep reciting are not producing in you the formation of greater conformity to Christ, yeah, maybe you do need to change it up. But I would venture to guess if you just walk into the long stream of church history, which says these prayers have been used for 2,000 years to form us, you might be formed by them. And I just know there are times in life when you do not have the words. You don't. You have none. And thank God there have prayers that have been written down for you in those moments. And so I think it's a weird thing that we have this war on prayer. I think praying recited prayers is a really beautiful thing we do together. Do y'all like the prayers? I love the prayers of the people of time on Sunday. Okay. I guess that's not St. Jude who has a war on it. Okay, fasting. Today, often in church circles, this is the way I hear fasting talked about. It's a means to an end. If I fast, then I am more likely to get my prayers answered. This is not a biblical view. This is a view I have heard people teach. It is not a biblical view. Fasting in the Bible was a whole body response to a sacred or grievous moment. War happened, so we fast. I sinned, so I fast. Somebody sinned against me, and so I fast. And what you're doing is you are agreeing with God in your whole body response to what has happened. Yeah.
What about these kind of that come out by praying fasting?
Yeah, that is such a New Testament idea of you are saying what's happening to this child is so grievous that we want to agree with God, not just in our prayers, but with our body over the sadness of what's happening. So Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, that is in preparation. They would fast during that time in preparation for confession, atonement, and forgiveness. It's like you're allowing your body to enter into the sadness. Do y'all fast? Does anybody fast? You know what I'm talking about when your body feels that depravity and you kind of go, ooh, you're not happy. No, you can be happy while you're fasting. That happens all the time. But the idea is you are connecting to the pathos of God in these moments. Spontaneous, and so not only is it in preparation from Yom Kippur is where we see fasting in the Bible, it's a spontaneous response to a grievous event. We see David do this because of the sins of others. And it's connected to doing justice. Caring for the poor and providing food for the hungry meant often you fasted in solidarity for them. This is how we see fasting done in the Old Testament. So this one's only cured through prayer. This is like to say, like, we are pulling our whole body into this event, but we are not confident our fasting is going to make God do something for us. And we're going to talk about this in the Lord's Prayer because we already believe that he's going to do the most good thing no matter what, always. That's why we approach him with prayer with great confidence, unlike the Gentiles or the pagans. And so again, you're entering into God's pathos about these events. However, by the time of Jesus, pious Jews fasted 2 times a week, Monday and Thursday. But it's not commanded in the Bible. There's nothing in the Bible that says we fast on Mondays and Thursdays, but by the time of Jesus, all the Pharisees were fasting Monday and Thursday, which is why Jesus is accused of not being faithful because he doesn't fast on Mondays and Thursdays. And what does he say in response to that? They'll fast, but you don't fast when the bridegroom's here. Why? It's a party right now. I'm going to go. They're going to fast. Trust me. They're going to eat for 3 days, I bet. Friday through Sunday, they're going to eat not much. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Would you be eating on Friday night after you saw that? No. Would you eat on Saturday? Probably not. Yeah. So he's like, hey, this isn't the time for fasting. This is Jubilee. We will fast. And it's really interesting that there's an early church document called the Didache, which is basically like a document that say, like, this is how you can be a faithful Christian. It's not scripture, but it's a really, really, really early document, like 50 AD. And they fast. The Christians took up fasting, but they did Wednesday and Friday because they didn't want anybody to think that they were fasting on the Jewish days. There's like restaurants were like, can y'all just do like 2 days a week? Like, that's weird. So anyways, it's funny how they kept the tradition going, but they just picked 2 different days a week. So the prohibition, hey, fix your face. Now, there's some debate. It's like he talks about washing your face and putting oil on it. That is something you can do before a celebration, but that's also just normal hygiene. And so most likely what Jesus is saying is, like, you don't need to go around mopey, like showing, it's a fasting day. First of all, if all the pious people are doing it, we all know. Like, we all know you're fasting. We all know that we're not eating at lunch. Maybe you are eating at lunch. But anyways, like the idea that you would show that you are fasting by over-exaggerating your hunger is what he's like, why are you doing that? Intent is, the fasting is designed to show grief, and they are putting on a show. And so he says, hey, you have your reward. Everyone knows you're fasting. Good job. Doesn't it start to feel cheap after I do this? Like, you do something, I'm like, great job. Like, you'd be like, never mind, I don't want that. And I'd be like, I bet you don't. Too late. You have your reward in full, is what he says. That's all you get. So the alternative is bathe, oil, act normal. Be normal, people. Because God knows. Because God sees good. God's not like, well done, Robin. No, he's like, hey, kiddo, love that. Really beautiful. I love that you're entering into the grief with me. I love that you're entering into confession. I love that your whole body worships me. That's awesome. So fasting, again, like in the post-apostolic time, was 2 times a week, Wednesday and Friday, and then in response to sin and human unworthiness due to before the Eucharist. So this is how the early church would talk about this. Is it still a response to sin? So you do something grievous, and in your response to that, you fast to show that you have a full body repentance. But also before you took the Eucharist. And so when they would catechize converts, especially, they would take like a year before you were welcomed completely into the community, before your first baptism. And often fasting would be a big part of that as you prepared to enter into the church body. Can you imagine? Like somebody says, oh, I want to join St. Jude. And we're like, great, it's going to take a year. You're going to walk with us. You're going to fast regularly. We're going to teach you the Bible. We're going to teach you how to walk with us. So you're going to do all these things. And then we're going to baptize you naked.
In front of everybody.
They often separated genders, but yes.
Nope, not joining.
No, not joining. Yeah, exactly, yeah. So different back then. You talk about community, you're like, well, we've been very vulnerable with each other at this point. Yeah, yeah, Julie.
I just read in an early document, Hippolytus, said who was a bishop of Rome, I think the 200s. They had pretty extensive requirements for initiates to the faith. But the reason then was because of the persecution.
Yeah.
They wanted to make sure that they were genuine and
Yep.
they knew the gravity of what they were doing.
Yep, that's exactly right. Because they didn't want to be betrayed, and they didn't want to welcome them in and then have them leave the group. And if you were a Roman soldier or you worked for the state, you could not be considered because you were working for the enemy. And so you had to join the pacifistic movement of the early church, so it wasn't just like, hey, we're just a really exclusive club. It's, hey, we're getting killed. So you say you want to be with us, you need to know what you're signing up for. It's the same reason when you see Timothy talks about like, hey, don't put the young widows on the list because they might just abandon it. And he's talking about like, don't conscript these young women for service in the church because they may just decide it's really hard and they don't want to do it. And so I think there's like an eagerness in church culture today, like let's get them in, maybe because we count noses and nickels. But in the early church, the goal was not explosive growth. It was trust and maturity. And so, which is a different level of vulnerability. Like the reality is like, Stacy, that when you started coming to St. Jude, we didn't know each other well enough for me to be baptizing anybody naked. And we live in a culture, such a sexualized culture, like such a hypersexualized culture that like, I'm not baptizing any of y'all naked. Babies, maybe, none of the rest of you. And even then, I don't think I want to baptize a naked baby. And so we just don't have a cultural understanding of that in a way that like the Jewish people were so conservative, that would have been wild for them. And the Greco-Roman people were like, naked? Sure, why not? And so, but the intimacy that demonstrates is not something that we usually expect of our people. And maybe we should. So it's interesting. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right about Hippolytus. If you go look at the early church's requirement, it was like, they were serious about people coming
They
in.
also did exorcism
They did.
before you got baptized.
Yep.
They what?
Exorcism.
Yeah,
Exorcism.
you had to deny your connection to the occult. I
Pronounce-
mean, it was pervasive.
Yeah. I would say that's in our vows now. Here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you renounce the evil one. Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think. Yeah. That's not that unusual in some parts of the world. The early church, y'all. It's so interesting when people get in debates about like what the role of women. I'm like, we're not doing any of it right. Like, if you want to start there, like we're not even anywhere close to what was designed in the first century. Like, what do you mean? I'm like, none of this. Like, the fact that y'all have, like, staff. Like, this is crazy. So if you want to start there, let's just dismantle the whole thing. Like, just take the whole thing apart. But also, I'd like to keep my job, so let's not get too crazy. Yeah, we live in a very, somebody said this, like, subsistence living was very normative. The cross-section of the early church and even Judaism is such that food, we just don't have food like we have in today's society. And the sense of body that we have today is so different. The shame that we carry in this social media world is so different. So I want to be very careful about fasting today. I think the way that this works out today is often, I know for me, I've done long fasts in the past, and the conversation always ends up moving toward how much weight I lost. And so So that's why I'd say I think it's hard to even compare fasting then to fasting now is what I'm getting at. So I would just, if any of you are interested in fasting, then I think intentions are still what you need to be at. What are my intentions with this? Yeah, Julie.
No, I haven't fasted a lot in my life, but I did one in January with a friend who runs a prayer ministry. However, we could all determine what is a fast to you.
Sure.
Between you and the Holy Spirit. But one thing I noticed in the course of that, I had more sensitivity to the voice of the Lord than I can ever remember. And I didn't even know that. I mean, yeah, it surprised me.
Yeah. I would argue, Julie, you are a very mature Christian, and I would encourage you to fast as often as you feel the Lord calling you into. I think if I'm at a 20...
I do lose weight too. No, I'm sorry, just being...
Yeah, I believe that. I did a 20-day fast once. I lost a lot of weight, and it wrecked my stomach. And got to the end of it and realized my community was so young and immature, we could not have a spiritual conversation about what I had done. So this is what I mean is if you were discipling a 22-year-old college girl, I'm not sure this is one of the disciplines I would encourage her toward. But if you are more mature in the faith and you can, in sincere intention, say, I'm doing this so that I can hear more of God, so that I can respond to grace, I think it's a really beautiful practice. This is one that I'm very careful about when I talk to people about fasting. There are people, because of the rampant eating disorders we have in our society, I would not encourage toward fasting. Yeah. So, but if you want to fast, I'm certainly not going to call you away from what God's calling you into. I just don't think the way that the Bible talked about fasting and then the culture we live in today lends itself to a one-to-one conversation. That's what I'd say. Okay. So all those, hey, not so great. God's reward, much better. That's the point of that. Then right smack dab in the middle of it, Jesus is like, oh, hey, I want to teach you guys how to pray real quick, okay? And I think this is hilarious. He's like, you shouldn't babble like the Gentiles. Have you ever wondered, or babble like the pagans? Have you ever wondered what that meant? Have you ever been like, that's weird? And have you ever been told you shouldn't have long prayers because of what Jesus says here? So I'll read you what Jesus says here. He says, when you pray, don't babble like the Gentiles or pagans, since they imagine they'll be heard for their many words. Don't be like them, because your Father knows the things you need before you ask him. Therefore, you should pray like this. And then he does the Lord's Prayer. Has anybody ever heard that and been told, yeah, long prayers don't please God? Yeah. And the babbling, right? Babble is such a good word. Babble. Babbling brook. Doesn't that sound nice? Okay, what's going on with the Gentiles? The Gentiles who are praying to their pagan gods, they did not believe that their gods were even awake all the time. They weren't even sure they were able to use the right name, because sometimes the gods are like, oh, you call me virtuous, but I'd rather you call me pretty today. Okay, the capriciousness and the offendability of their gods meant Gentile prayers were full of anxiety. And their God didn't know what they needed before they prayed. So they had to wake their God up, cajole their God into caring, and then convince their God that their need was worthy of their God moving on their behalf. That we have prayers recorded from this time where they're like, hey, Diana, queen of so-and-so, maybe you go by this, I'm not really, right? They have a God, an unknown God, an altar to an unknown God at Marcel. You remember this? He's like, you don't even know his name? They're like, no, but just in case. Okay? Which is why Jesus is like, hey, they pray these long, babbling prayers because they don't even know if their God's awake. They don't even know if their God's going to care about what they need. They don't even know if they're going to get the name right. And Jesus says, you don't have to be that way. You know why? Because your God already knows what you need. You don't have to babble. You want to know who your God is? Your Father, whose name is holy. His kingdom come, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Hey, we need bread, God, and we need you to forgive our debts as we forgive others, because forgiven people forgive. And we hope you lead us not into temptation. And how many of y'all say, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory? Yeah, that's not in the Bible. But we just keep saying it because we've been doing that. Yeah. Because it came in later scribal, whatever, but that's not original to the prayer. Sorry to disappoint everybody. But I keep saying it even though I'm a textual critic, because It sounds really nice, like Larry says. And also church tradition says it. So I don't have a problem with that. But in other words, you can't manipulate or control our God. He already knows what you need. You don't have to be anxious when you pray. Paul picks up on this idea in Philippians 4. You don't have to be anxious. But with thanksgiving, make your requests known to God. Because the peace of God will guard your heart. You know why he can say that to the Philippians? Because Jesus already told him this. And if you don't think Paul said the Lord's Prayer regularly, you're crazy. All right? So they have a defective prayer because they have a defective God. You can pray long prayers to our God. It's not the length he's going after. It's the babbling because you're not even sure who God is. But if you're talking to our God, he loves to listen to his children. Carry on. Carry on. Pray as long as you want. It's crazy to me. Like, you hear these saints of old, they're like, oh, I prayed all morning and all evening. And I wonder if people are like, well, that's a little long, don't you think? No, that's silly. Pray to the true God, and you can pray all day. The Lord's Prayer, there's a Jewish prayer called the Kaddish that most likely is what Jesus is building upon. They're very, very similar in words. However, the Kaddish only has the vertical component, and Jesus adds in that horizontal component, asking for our daily bread, asking for forgiveness, asking God to not lead us into temptation. And so when people are like, oh, it's just a Jewish prayer. Yeah, Jesus is Jewish. I'm always surprised by that. So Jesus is taking the Kaddish and improving it. Because he's allowed to do that. Because he's God. So, in this commentary, I was reading this to Robin the other day. I thought this was so good. Scott McKnight, when he gets to the part on the Lord's Prayer, he's like, okay, I'm going to ask the question for you. How does one say anything fresh about the Lord's Prayer? He's like, I'm about to write a commentary. Like, how do I say anything? He's like, and the first thing to say is this: do not try to say something new, because you will be wrong. And the second thing to say is, let traditional significance shape what you say. And the third is this: say what it says. Its value is its heritage, and its heritage will guide you. You don't have to improve upon the Lord's Prayer. We know what it means. We know what it means for God to make his name holy. We know what it means for heaven to come to earth. We know what it means for God to provide for our daily needs. We know what it means to forgive others. And we know what it means to not be taken into temptation. That's a really beautiful prayer. I have nothing fresh to offer you all. Nothing. Just let it be what it is. So this is Jesus' template of prayer. He meant literally pray this, and we have evidence that the early church did. A lot of evidence. This is the Jewish 3 times of prayer a day. We have evidence that the Christians started praying this. God is our Father. He's relationally sovereign, and you are asking God to make his own name holy. Like this is it. This is the Lord's Prayer. It's a really beautiful thing. Make your kingdom come and your will be done. We depend on you for our daily provision. We are people who forgive because you forgive us. Forgiven people forgive. And please keep us from trial. And then for thine is the kingdom. It's not in there. It sounds good, though. Do you wonder about who added that? That is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. Of all the things they could add.
They were seeing it.
Yeah. I think it's beautiful. It's not in the Bible, or it shouldn't be in the Bible. Is it in my Bible? It's not in my Bible. Yeah, it shouldn't be in your Bible, but I'm great with it being in your liturgies on Sunday, because I believe that's what the early church post 400 were doing. All right. We should pray. Like, Jesus assumes we are praying. He assumes we're giving alms. He assumes we're fasting. He is not telling us to do those things. He is assuming we're already doing them and calling us to do them with good intentions. We should pray the Lord's Prayer, and praying this prayer shapes a person. So if you are not sure what to pray, I would pray this. And I would ask yourself, how are your prayers shaping you? Right? Formation is about these things we do over and over again. And if your prayers are, hey, God, quick Hail Mary, need to find a parking spot, and that's it, that is forming you in maybe good ways, but it is also malforming you in other ways. Maybe not malforming you, but you could be shaped better, right? I think that's a perfectly acceptable prayer, by the way. I pray that all the time. Do I not pray that all the time? Y'all wouldn't believe the little things that I pray for, that when Robin and I first became friends, she's like, you really just be praying for everything. I'd be like, everything. Like, we go on vacation, I'm like, Lord, if we could just see an animal today, just any animal, just one animal, that'd be so great, Lord, thanks. Or we're like, I'd be like, there's a moose. Look at that. Yeah, so, yeah. No, not yet. I should pray that more. We do have peacocks in our neighborhood. We did have that. Remember when was it the ocelots I got out of the Dallas Zoo? And
What?
yeah, they were like,
Gone out?
oh, they were stolen.
Oh,
They were,
Every year some animal gets out.
No, there was a cat. Remember, it was a small cat that got out. I don't know if it was an ocelot. I don't know what it was. But I was in Chicago when it happened, and I remember multiple people were texting me because they thought it was interesting. I was zoology degree, so they thought it was interesting. But instead of being like, yeah, that's interesting, I kept going, it wasn't me. Like, I kept saying that back to them. And they were like, that's not what we're saying. I was like, it's just a good joke. But anyways, I don't know what I'm getting at. Oh, prayer. You should pray for everything. I'm not saying, Lord, can I have a great spot up front? It's a bad prayer. I'm just saying, if that's the only prayer you're praying each day, you're not getting the full effect of what it means to be formed into Christ-likeness. Okay. We're going to write our own because I give online. I don't know how y'all give. Nobody knows what I give except Diane Hawkins and me, okay, and the IRS. I get paid to pray publicly. I pray privately. We don't have public the way, like there's nowhere I can go at 3 p.m. that I can make sure y'all are going to see me pray. Like, I mean, I could, like, hang out at the coffee shop when y'all come and go, thank you, Lord, for the, but, like, I'm not doing that. Y'all aren't doing that, I don't think. Fasting, y'all don't know when I fast. And I fast for nutritious reasons, too. So, like, that's a whole other thing, right? Like, y'all don't know. I'm going around telling y'all if I fast. What are the things, going back to that earlier time, and again, I am not asking y'all to attack other Christians, but I am asking you to consider, if we wrote our own, what's something that we can do that can be done with the wrong intentions? When you blank, don't blank. I realize there's a lot of blanks here. Because you have your reward. Instead, do this because your Father rewards you or sees you or whatever. All standard versions welcome. You don't have to write NIV, CSB. It could be Jim's standard version. Yeah, it could be KJV, I don't care. You write it however you want. But you guys are going to take your writing utensils, all these things, and we're going to put some up here. And ask ourselves, if this is the moral picture that Jesus is after, he's after our whole selves, what are the things that we know we can do for others' attention that maybe we could have a corrective here because we love ourselves enough to correct ourselves? All right? So grab your pens, your papers, good luck in your groups. Oh, so good. Okay. These are my own for myself. So when you preach the Bible, don't show off knowledge. That applause ain't worth it. Instead, preach from love, which pleases God. And then when that's apropos for this week. I always have a hard time when I preach in new spaces because I'm like, I have the temptation to like show off my knowledge so then they'll trust me. And I've had to learn to be like, no, you just need to honor the Lord. And they can trust him. They don't need to trust you. But I've always felt that temptation when I go into new places. I like really want y'all to know that I love you. It's not tempting at St. Jude as much. When you pray for others, don't be highfalutin in your speech. Webster's is not your friend. Instead, be sincere because God welcomes your prayers, which is no small thing. When you study your Bible in public, don't thump it to be seen. Instead, focus on the message because your Father will speak to you. Stacey, you want to tell them what you originally wanted? Don't thump it, or your Father will thump you. All right, y'all talk to me about this. Where do we see this? Talk to me about this. Where do you see this?
I specifically was thinking of David Street Espresso. So then,
in the mornings.
6 a.m. you walk in, there's like 15 different.
It's like a Chick-fil-A in the Park Cities. Yep.
I was shocked.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yep. I always think of like I remember when Instagram was like big, it was like everybody's quiet time was going on their Instagram. It was like time with God. I was like,
I think you're talking about like there's no public place where I can do this and like make sense social.
yeah, I guess there is a public place. Like, yeah. Which is like, I got, this week I was talking to a woman who's pitching an article for a magazine. And it's like, is like Christian publishing healthy? And so she called me and she was like, and her whole thing was, why are you not pursuing public theology? Like she's wondering why I am not trying to build a bigger platform. And so I answered her question, but it was interesting how like I had already prepped most of this message. And it was like interesting to me how like there is a space for public theologians. Certainly, Paul did things publicly. But it feels like the medium demands sacrifices be made on, or maybe not even but like you will be listened to the prettier it is. I just think like that's what makes the medium even difficult to say, is there a way to do this well? Which is, I wrestled through that. Like y'all saw I did the Thursday theologies for a while. I might bring those back, but it's like, in a world of YouTube and social media and all that, can you be faithful? And I think yes is absolutely the answer. And it comes back to these intentions. But I think it's like naive to think that these are neutral mediums, as if they don't reward pretty. I am not pretty. So, like all the time people are like, your lighting stinks. I'm like, I'm aware. Don't watch. All right, don't hold back your generosity out of fear. Instead, give freely, trusting in God's provision, because God gives abundantly and will take care of you. It's really good. Y'all want to highlight that or discuss that anymore? You like it? Jen, you want a high five? Jen, good job, Jen. Yay! Now you don't get a reward. Oh, man. Don't listen. I really like this. This is really good. Don't listen with the response you will give as your focus. Instead, be present with those around you, seeking to see them as God does. It's like a generosity of listening. That's really good. That wins. Whoever wrote that.
Need that a lot more now.
Yeah, that is, we just talk at each other. Again, it goes back to the medium creates so much of we're used to monologue. And so, there's an intrusion of dialogue at times. Or you start talking and, I don't have my phone, it's up there, but you're just like, oh, yeah. That is, so painful. All right, what's our so what? Jesus assumes we're going to do acts of piety, right? When people are like, oh, this is all grace, we don't have to do anything. I'm like, I don't know what you're describing, okay? That sounds like a really neat club where you pay your dues. But in Christianity, we obey. We are saved by grace. There is nothing you can do to earn it. However, faith without works is dead. Jesus' brother said that. So, we are going to be people who pursue piety, if that's the moral picture. But he knows our hearts. And so the Sermon on the Mount is unrelenting in its pursuit of our heart. Do y'all feel that? It is not letting you off the hook. Hey, you should be humble, generous, gracious people. And by the way, I want all of you. I don't even want you to be angry. I don't even want you to lust, okay? And by the way, when you're doing these good works, I'm always watching. I know why you did that. And that's a good thing. Isn't it a good thing Jesus doesn't let us get away with that half-heartedness? What a beautiful gift that God's like, no, I'm going to ask more of you because I know what a beautiful thing it is when there is a whole soul, body, mind, spirit given to me, and I know you ultimately want that. So I'm going to ask you to give it to me. Jesus did a lot of things publicly, but never for showy reasons. He's our model. This is not saying you can't do public things. It is not saying that. But it is saying if you're going to do things publicly like Jesus, we do them out of a sincere heart. If you have mixed motives, do the good anyways, right, Jim? You're not gonna get this right. I'm going to Philly on Friday. I'm going to speak at a conference on Saturday. I'm going to do my best to be humble. I mean it. I'm going to pray for humility. I'm going to ask that God give me hearts to see the women in front of me, that God would give me a love that surpasses what is natural so that I can speak to them in a way that honors who they are as the image bearers of God. And I will walk off that stage and go, ooh, I hope they liked it. Dang it. I'm getting better at it. But I'm telling y'all.
Don't overthink it.
Yeah. But that is good. That's going to happen. Hopefully not. And then it gets real hard because you know what's going to happen? Even if I lay an egg, you know what's going to happen? What's going to happen? You've seen this 1,000 times.
A chicken will be born.
Well, not me if I lay an egg. It's like a crocodile.
Everyone's gonna come up to you in the chat and talk about it. Chickens are naturals.
Yeah, I'm gonna hear praise. Because they're lovely women. They are not doing something they shouldn't be doing. And then I'm going to have to go, isn't God good? Isn't God so good? And I can say that with sincerity. Oh, God is so good. What was your favorite part? I thought that was pretty good when I wrote that. Yep. Have I told you I'm working on a doctorate? I am. Oh, that came up? Okay.
Yeah, Mark Twain said, I've always been uncomfortable with praise. I feel like it never goes on long enough.
Yeah. I can tell y'all with total sincerity, getting closer to 40, the picture I've been demonstrating for y'all is 25-year-old Nika. God changes us. He changes us. I am not the same ego-driven monster that I was in my 20s. I'm not. But that monster is there, and I could feed it. I could feed her. She's hungry. Or I can lean into the Lord and trust that God sees me and acknowledges my hard work and has given me gifts that he hopes that I will use for his glory and the good of others. And that's what I mean by you're going to have mixed motives, but do the good and ask God to change you along the way. Formation is assumed in the Bible. We should not leave this unquestioned in our lives. Take some inventory. How are you praying? How are you spending your time? How are you feeding the me monster in ways that maybe you're not even realizing it? And then build in rhythms of formation that make you more like Christ. And then we should all pray more, probably. Some of y'all might pray a lot, so I'm going to give y'all to determine whoever is praying enough. But for the rest of us, we should pray more, probably. And if you don't know where to start, may I offer to you, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. You are in good company if that's the only prayer you pray every day. I bet you'll pray more than that, but it's a great starting spot. All right, friends, if nobody's told you today they love you, I do, but way more importantly, God does. Let's pray. God, we do love you, and we are silly. We are all made from the dust of the earth and enlivened by the breath of your mouth, and you are the center of the universe. And Lord, we sometimes just look horizontally when the thing vertically in front of us is not a thing, but a person, the most gloriously spectacular, beautiful person in the whole world. But we look down. So help us to look up. Help us to be formed into greater conformity to your Son. Help us to chase after you. Help us to seek the attaboy and the attagirl in you. Help us to trust that you already delight in us and to not take that for granted, but to dwell in that. Thank you for the Sermon on the Mount and its pursuit of our heart. Thank you that you do not leave us unchanged. Be with me as I teach on Saturday. Help me to be sincere in my mission and sincere in my love and sincere in my teaching. And be with my friends this week and help them to live lives of sincerity. We ask this in the name of the Father, Son, and Spirit. Amen. Love you guys. Yeah.